יוסי, שכחת להגיד שאני למדתי באוניברסיטה שנתיים בגבעת רם. יכולתי למצוא את הדרך. לא היה לי מכונית, אבל שם זה הכל right angles. And, so I will... Okay, there we go, thank you. I was a student at Hebrew University, and though I studied at Givat Ram, I have a special connection to this place. I was a student there from 1966 to 1968, you can do the math. And I was there in June of 67, and mid-June they came to the university. Every Israeli was of course serving, and they recruited a group of us to come up here to clean out the amphitheater for the famous concert. And we went up on a bus, and I think it's Kav Tesha, 9, they used to come up here, and the bus driver took out his 6 and turned it upside down. So we didn't get invited to the concert though. I can't imagine why we didn't just stay, but it's a great pleasure to be with all of you today. Before I get started, I want to express my appreciation to Hebrew University. I'm not an alum, but maybe I can get a card too, you know. Including Ambassador Yossi Gal for the welcome, to Menachem Ben Sasson, whom we greeted and we welcomed. We visited Emory University many years ago to talk about the Cairo Geniza. And I remember the first slide you showed with Solomon Schechter in his study. It was such a mess, I felt better. Mine was neat compared to that. I also want to acknowledge the participation and the warm and welcoming words of Ambassador Tom Nides, and of course, Diaspora Ambassador, my friend Nachman Shai, Special Envoy Noah Tishby, Jonathan Greenblatt, who not only headed the ADL, but I think for the past 8 months had another job, and that was getting me confirmed, which was finally happened in a bipartisan, a word we don't use very often when we're talking about our Congress and our Senate, but a bipartisan effort. I'm delighted to be here. This is my first trip as the ambassador, as the special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. I was privileged yesterday to have a very warm and productive meeting with Prime Minister Yair Lapid. I showed him that I was reading his book. I told him, many people have read the book. I'm reading the wonderful English translation because I'm too lazy to read it in Hebrew. But I said I read it in Riyadh and Jeddah when I had jet lag, and I probably was the first person there to be reading it as an antidote, to be reading it in those locales, but certainly as an antidote to jet lag. And I recommend it highly. I also met with many of my friends, many of whom are here, of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who are doing such a wonderful job, with whom I've been working together with for years on understanding, analyzing, and responding to anti-Semitism, and with Knesset Speaker Miki Levy and several MKs. I have to say one of the profoundly moving moments was my visit to Yad Vashem. As I said to some people afterwards, I've taught there, I've studied there, I've lectured there, I've been to lectures there, I've given seminars, attended seminars, but I never was there in the capacity as an official representative of the United States government, accompanied by 2 very big Marines, and to lay a wreath in the Remembrance Hall. I'm glad you're all here today, and what I'd like to do is start. I know many of you know I'm coming, as I said, from Jeddah and from Riyadh, and you want to hear about that, especially in terms of the Abraham Accords, and I will talk about that towards the end. Because when I came into this job, I saw my task as having 2 directions. One, of course, to put out fires or to deal with the aftermath of fires, to crush out the embers so they don't emerge into another fire, whether it would be in Europe, in South America, wherever it might be, any part of the world. But I also was lucky, because I was coming in the wake of the Abraham Accords, and suddenly someone with the title of monitoring and combating the anti-Semitism as their job title, job description, had a chance to do something positive, to build. And that's why I chose for my first trip to go to the Gulf and to make Saudi Arabia my first stop. And it was an amazing visit, especially in relation to our subject today, and I will talk about that in a moment. But first I wanted, if I might, almost take off my diplomatic, kippah, hat, whatever diplomats wear, and put on my mortarboard, which academics wear, which sits at home in my closet, and step back, and as an academic, going back into my role of historian, analyze and talk a little bit of structural analysis of anti-Semitism. Because though all of us in this room are appalled by it, I think some of us, we fail to try to fully understand what it is. First and foremost, I think we've got to understand that anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory. And that's what makes it different from other prejudices. It is a prejudice like other prejudices. If a Jew does something wrong, that's how Jews are. If a Jew does something right, she's one of the good ones. It's the same analysis you can use for any other form of prejudice. Think about the etymology of the word prejudice, prejudge. Don't confuse me with the facts. I've made up my mind. I see the person in the hijab. I see the person in a kippah. I see the woman with her head covered. I know who they are. I see a person with black skin. I know who they are. I know their values because of prejudice, because of that internal prejudice. However, as I said a moment ago, it's also a conspiracy theory, and that's what makes it unique. Yesterday, in a very animated conversation with your Prime Minister, and I said it's like other prejudices. He cited Yehuda Bauer. He said, but Yehuda Bauer says it's unique. I said, it's also unique. And this is the difference with other prejudices. The conspiracy theory, the idea that Jews use their wealth, their power, their smarts, but they're malicious, nefarious, evil, crafty, conniving smarts to wreak havoc on the non-Jewish world. And we see that today in what we call the Great Replacement Theory, which many people date to France, but really way precedes it. Some of you, of course, remember, I'm sure, the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, which was an effort to bring together the most radical extremist groups in a united bloc. And what did they chant on that Friday night as they walked across the campus of the University of Virginia? Jews will not replace us. And people said, what did they mean by that? Well, that was the Great Replacement Theory. It's not new. If you go back to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, it's the same thing. The idea being that there is an effort to destroy, now in its contemporary iteration, white Christian culture, by, let's use the European continent as an example, by flooding Europe with black people, with brown people, with Muslims, thereby destroying white Christian culture. But the person who subscribes to this says, these people, they're not smart enough, they're not talented enough, I'm speaking, not me speaking, in the voice of the racist, to be doing this on their own. There has to be someone behind the scenes, someone with the wealth, someone with the power, someone with the malicious smarts, someone who knows how to do their evil work behind the scenes, but not get caught. So the racist knows immediately that the Jews are behind this. The conspiracy theorist, who may not start out as an anti-Semite, when he puts out that template, can only end up one place. It must be the Jews. where many of you mentioned, and I greatly appreciate the terrible events yesterday in Highland Park. Almost, it happens too frequently to enumerate, but some of you may still remember just a month and a half ago, 5 weeks ago, the terrible events in Buffalo, where a young man radicalized on the internet, and I know we're talking about this, drove 200 miles from his home to go to a area in Buffalo where he had figured out was the greatest concentration of black people, to shoot and murder them. In a supermarket, they were buying, it's a weekend, some were buying ice cream for their kids, they were buying snacks to have a movie night, whatever it was, to go in and murder them. I had I took upon myself the dubious responsibility, or dubious act, I don't know, it was not a pleasure, of reading his so-called manifesto, his 180-page manifesto. And it becomes very clear that he wanted to kill as many black people as he could. Black people were a danger, black people were a danger to white society. But exactly as I said a moment ago, he believed that behind their efforts to destroy black society were Jews. And he described Jews, and I quote, as demons, and the biggest problem the Western world has ever had. They had to be killed, and if they are lucky, to be exiled. We cannot show them any sympathy. They have to go back to the hell from where they came. So in other words, this effort, the blacks were the puppets, the Jews were the puppeteers. Why do I stress this? Because too often when we fight anti-Semitism, or we fight racism, or whatever ism we're choosing to fight, we fight it in silos. We fight it in silos. You can't fight it in silos. It's the same structural analysis, and as many of you know, as we often like to say, it may start with the Jews, but it doesn't end with the Jews. The attacks in my country, we're all familiar with the terrible attack in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Synagogue. The comments made and the writings by that murderer were echoed by the murderer in San Diego at Poway, at the synagogue in Poway, and then were echoed by the murderer in Christchurch, New Zealand, who attacked 2 mosques and killed 51 Muslims and injured 40 more. There's a connection, even going back earlier in my country, Dylan Roof, who went into Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, South Carolina, after studying for an hour with the people there, African Americans, murdered them. They all subscribe to the same view. This effort to destroy the culture, behind it is the Jew, the black person is the enemy as well. They rely on the same imagery. George Soros, whatever, you might disagree with his political views, you might disagree with his financial views. George Soros has become, to quote the sociologist David Hirsch in the UK, the Rothschild of the 21st century. Do not tell me, I said this to someone, and they said, oh, he collaborated. He was 14 years old during the Holocaust. To say about a 14-year-old that this was a Jew talking, a traditional Jew, in fact, is quite outrageous. But it doesn't matter. For the person who cites Soros, whether it's someone in Hungary or someone on social media in the United States or any other place, Soros means Jew. Soros means Rothschild, Soros means Jew. And he becomes one of the main, his depiction. And of course, then you have attacks on the state of Israel, and some of them done quite surreptitiously. The Havara Agreement, for instance, which was the agreement, I think that some of you may know about it, in the summer of 1933, in other words, just a few months after the Nazis had come to power. The German Zionist organization reached an agreement with the Nazi government. It was the only agreement ever made with the Jewish group and the Nazi government to allow Jews who were leaving the Third Reich. There were terrible emigration taxes, which got greater and greater, so that by the time, by the mid-30s, you left with virtually nothing. But those who were going to these shuv, who were able to get the precious permits to enter the shuv, they could get credit for their block funds, and those block funds would be used by these shuv to buy German equipment, agricultural equipment, tiles, because some of the old Art Deco Bauhaus houses in Tel Aviv, and when they did the remodeling, if they were smart enough to leave the old tiles, and you look at the back of the tiles, they're made in Germany. And there have been exhibits, in fact, in Israeli museums on this. But of course, that is completely distorted. It was a way to help the Yishuv, which was in desperate need of equipment. It was a way to help these people get some credit for their funds. It was a pact with the devil. There was a debate about it. But now it has become the template for people who want to attack Israel, want to attack Zionists, and engage in anti-Semitism. See, the Jews were part of this. It's the same thing as Foreign Minister Lavrov saying Hitler's mother was a Jew, i.e. Hitler was a Jew, and Jews attacked their own. Jews participated in their own destruction. So we see it, and another point, we see it in that way, and we see this interconnectedness, the use of these kind of tropes to attack the state of Israel. I think the other thing to understand about anti-Semitism, which makes it unique of the conspiracy theory, and the other unique element is its ubiquity, its free-flowing characteristic. I was an expert witness in the civil trial brought against the Unite the Right marchers by the family of Heather Heyer, the woman who was murdered, mowed down by a car, and other people who were hurt badly. And in my report to the court, which is online, and my statements to the jury, I said, you have to understand that anti-Semitism is ubiquitous, it's free-flowing. It comes from every place on the political spectrum. It's not right, left, center. It comes from Christians, it comes from Muslims, it comes from atheists, it comes from Jews. You know, it's unlike other prejudices, most of which flow, certainly racial prejudices, and a whole variety of others, usually come from the right. Here we find anti-Semitism coming from all these places. And by the way, I think it's a complete waste of time to engage in the debate, which is worse. It would be, I don't know, Sholem Aleichem might have said, would you rather have dysentery or cholera? You know, they're all bad. And what I have noticed, and I described yesterday, I think, to my friends at the MFA, that many Jews engage what I call in the Moshe Dayan approach to fighting anti-Semitism. They see it on the other side of the political spectrum, but they're blinded to see it in those next to them. So those on the right are very quick to see it on the left. Those on the left are very quick to see it on the right, but fail to see it next to them. I'm not saying, by the way, and I've been criticized by some people or misinterpreted, I'm not saying it's all equal. And at times it's much more prevalent on one side, and at times it's much more prevalent on the other side. On one side it might be words, on other sides it might be guns and bullets, and of course you differentiate. But in terms of looking at sources of anti-Semitism, you cannot just judge and look in one direction. We also know, and to turn certainly here in Jerusalem, we also know that some of the criticism of Israel often morphs into anti-Semitism or is used by the anti-Semite. I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm just a critic of Israel. We know that, we recognize it. In no audience would I be bringing coals to Newcastle more than, to quote the Bard, than in an audience, making this point in an audience like this. However, we also know that sometimes criticism, as Ambassador Nige was saying, criticism of Israel is not anti-Semitic. It may be wrong, it may be unfair, it may be unjustified, but it may not fall into the category of anti-Semitism. And I would urge, as I spoke with my friends yesterday at the MFA and with other people during the day, that we be careful about this. We be careful about this for a number of reasons. Amongst them, Talmudic language, tafaska merubeh lo tafaska. If you try to grab too much, you don't grab anything at all. If you call everything anti-Semitism, when there's a real act of anti-Semitism, like Chicken Little in Hebrew, right? Dear me, the sky is falling. No one pays attention, or worse, they dismiss you. You may be very accurately calling them out as an anti-Semite. They may be a flaming anti-Semite, but they can also you call everyone an anti-Semite. So I think when we call someone, and I rarely call someone an anti-Semite, what I say is what they're doing is anti-Semitism. Because I don't know what's in their heart. And that's between, as I like to say, them and their cardiologist. And if they're engaging in that, I hope they have a cardiologist. But we have to be very careful on that. We have to be judicious. So that when we criticize something, it speaks in that way. Let me turn now to just for a moment, to my recent visit to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. When I was asked by my colleagues at the State Department, Mr. Ludovic Hood, who's with me as my senior advisor on matters relating to the Gulf, where I wanted to travel, they were beginning to set up my travel schedule. Did I want to go first to Europe? What did I want? I said I want to go to the Middle East, and I want to go certainly to Israel, but I also want to go to the Gulf states, and I want to start in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I want to start there because they're not yet part of the Abraham Accords, and I don't ask me because I don't know whether they will become, but what we do know is that, and anybody who watches that scene, you can't avoid it, you can't not see it, there has been a tremendous change in attitudes, changes in behavior. We certainly don't agree with everything, but there has been differences vis-a-vis the position of women, vis-a-vis certain religious rules, etc. I could have gone to Paris, Budapest, Helsinki, Buenos Aires, but I chose to go there. And I was received, and when some reporters asked me right before I went, when the State Department announced I was going, do you think they'll engage with you? I said, well, my title makes it very clear I'm not coming to talk about climate change or COVID-19 or oil production or whatever it might be. I'm coming to talk about Jew hatred. And again, as many of you know very well, for too many decades, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was a great exporter of Jew hatred, sending imams outside, and they engaged in extremism outside the kingdom. That was just fine. But what I found was something quite different, and something that has changed there dramatically in the past few years, and I just want to close with a couple of comments about that. I met with the heads and staff of entities focused on combating violent extremism, focused on interfaith dialogue, including the Muslim World League, whose Secretary General visited Auschwitz in 2020. I met with the Office of Islamic Cooperation. I met with the Minister of Islamic Affairs. I described him, someone said, well, what does that mean, the Minister of Islamic Affairs? An Israeli was asking me. I said, it's like the Rav Harashi for the Ashkenazim and the Sfardim, and Sar HaDatot, and the Director General of Misrat HaDatot rolled into one in a country where they like them, and respect them, and want to hear from them and listen to them. He can make any, analogies. And he met with me for 40 minutes. And talked very openly and talked about the history of the Jews in the region. If you know your history, the Jews were there. They were there, in fact, before Islam in Medina. And the deputy foreign minister very proudly said to me, I come from a city with Jewish history, from Medina. And it was not just, and we heard from younger people who seem willing to divide between the geopolitical crisis and mashper, whatever you want to call it, extant here in Israel, and vis-a-vis the Palestinians, vis-a-vis the land on the other side, whatever name you want to give to it. and the fact that anti-Semitism is something separate and apart. These are important first steps. There was a clear willingness to continue this conversation, and as I told my interlocutors, including Princess Rima, the Saudi ambassador to the United States, with whom I spent 2 hours before my visit, before I left, to continue. I told them, I said, this is not my trip to Saudi Arabia. Sometimes you have envoys who like to say, I went to 82 countries. So if you go to the country twice, you can only go to 81 countries, you know. I said, this is my first trip to Saudi Arabia, because I think there is room to move things forward. There is a change afoot in this region. You know it, you've seen it. There is much that remains to be done. But if, as a special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, someone who has been directly charged by the President of the United States, Joe Biden, who I think is coming here soon, right? To address this issue. And when I recently saw him at a gathering at the White House, there were quite a few people there. I went up and said, I'm Deborah Lipstadt. I said, I know who you are, and you've got a job to do. And the same thing with Secretary Blinken, whom I report directly, who heard when I was going that Saudi Arabia was going to be my first stop. He said, please, please come back and tell me exactly what you saw and exactly what you heard. There is an interest, there's an interest to build, and what do we say? If we can be, don't call them your sons, call them your builders. If we can be builders, for me, Diane, we're past that holiday, but that would be entirely sufficient. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I hope you'll reconsider when you're done with this job applying for a history professor.
I won't apply. We asked her.
Well, we can ask her.
It's too late, it's 10:31.
Okay, Deborah, your comments about your trip to Saudi Arabia is exactly an outstanding introduction to the next panel, to the next session, and I would ask you to join us.